I woke up that Tuesday morning in May, expecting a normal day in Scottsdale, Arizona, but instead found three massive concrete barriers blocking my driveway like someone had dropped prison barricades across my property. My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hand as I stared through the front window at the gray monstrosity that had somehow appeared overnight, each barrier easily 4 feet tall and stretching the entire width of my driveway entrance. My name is Frank Dawson, and I'd lived in the Saguaro Hills community for exactly 18 months. The neighborhood was one of those pristine Arizona developments where every house looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine, complete with desert landscaping and strict rules about everything from mailbox colors to the exact shade of beige you could paint your trim. I had purchased the house after my divorce, looking for a fresh start and a place where I could work remotely in peace. What I got was a front row seat to the most aggressive homeowners association in the greater Phoenix area. The barriers were enormous, the kind you see at highway construction sites or blocking off dangerous areas. Someone had positioned them with precision, creating an impenetrable wall that made it impossible for me to get my truck out of the garage. My first instinct was disbelief, then confusion, followed rapidly by anger as I realized this was no accident or mistake by a confused construction crew. These had been placed deliberately, and I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who was responsible. I grabbed my phone and headed outside, the Arizona heat already building despite the early hour. The concrete was fresh, still slightly damp from being moved, and I could see tire tracks in the gravel along the street where heavy equipment had been positioned. Each barrier had to weigh several hundred pounds, maybe more. This was not something a single person could move without serious machinery. This was planned, coordinated, and executed with the kind of determination that spoke of serious intent. My Ring camera. The thought hit me like lightning. I had installed the doorbell camera 6 months ago after my Amazon packages kept disappearing, and it had a clear view of the entire driveway and street. If someone had done this overnight, the camera would have caught everything. I pulled up the app on my phone, hands shaking with a mixture of rage and anticipation, and started scrolling back through the footage. There it was. Starting at 2:47 in the morning, a flatbed truck with desert equipment rental, painted on the side, pulled up to my house. The infrared night vision showed everything in stark black and white clarity. A man in work clothes climbed out of the cab, followed by 2 more workers. Then, like a villain stepping out of a car in a movie, Patricia Henderson emerged from a white SUV that pulled up behind the truck. Patricia Henderson was the president of the Saguaro Hills HOA board, a woman in her late 40s with carefully styled blonde hair and the kind of perpetual tan that came from too many country club afternoons. She wore white capri pants and a pink polo shirt even at 3 in the morning, and she stood with her arms crossed as she directed the workers with pointing fingers and animated gestures. The camera had captured audio, and when I turned up the volume, her shrill voice came through clearly. "Right there, exactly blocking the driveway," Patricia said on the recording. "I want it completely impossible for him to leave. This will teach him about following community standards." I watched the entire 23-minute operation unfold. The workers used a small crane mounted on the truck to lift each barrier into position. Patricia supervised everything, checking angles and making them adjust the placement twice to ensure maximum blockage. She even took photos with her phone, clearly documenting her handiwork. At one point, one of the workers questioned whether this was legal, and Patricia's response made my blood boil. "I am the HOA president, which means I have full authority over community enforcement," she snapped at the worker. "This homeowner has violated multiple covenants, and when warnings do not work, we take direct action. Now, finish the job so I can get home." The video showed them completing the barrier installation, Patricia handing cash to the workers, and everyone driving away by 3:15 in the morning. I had been asleep the entire time, completely unaware that my property was being vandalized by the very organization supposed to maintain neighborhood standards and property values. I saved the video footage to 3 different locations, including cloud storage and my laptop, then called the police non-emergency line. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first, probably thinking this was just another HOA dispute. But when I explained that someone had blocked my driveway with concrete barriers and I had video evidence, her tone changed. She said an officer would be out within the hour. While I waited, I called my office to let them know I would be working from home again today, which was not an issue since I was a software consultant and had flexibility. Then, I called my attorney, Marcus Chen, who had helped me with the home purchase and had warned me about the HOA's aggressive reputation. His secretary said he was in court, but would call me back as soon as possible. Officer Daniel Rodriguez arrived 45 minutes later in a Scottsdale PD cruiser. He was in his early 30s, professional and thorough, and his expression shifted from routine boredom to genuine interest as I showed him the barriers and then the ring camera footage on my tablet. He watched the entire video twice, taking notes and asking me to send him a copy. "This is criminal trespassing, destruction of property access, and potentially harassment," Officer Rodriguez said, shaking his head. "HOA or not, you cannot just block someone's driveway with concrete barriers. This prevents emergency access, prevents you from leaving your property, and was done with clear malicious intent based on that video." "What are my options?" I asked, feeling vindicated that at least the police understood this was serious. "Bah, I am going to document everything, take photos, and file a report. You should absolutely contact your attorney about a restraining order and civil action. As for the barriers, you have every right to have them removed immediately since they are on your property and blocking your access. I can have them cited for illegal dumping and obstruction. Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "This is insane." Officer Rodriguez made several calls, and within another 30 minutes, a second officer arrived along with a supervisor. They all reviewed the footage, and the supervisor, a sergeant named Williams, confirmed that they would be paying Patricia Henderson a visit. They took detailed statements, measurements, and photographs from every angle. The sergeant explained that based on the evidence, they would be pursuing criminal mischief charges at minimum, possibly conspiracy since it involved hiring contractors to commit the act. "The thing is," Sergeant Williams explained, standing in the Arizona sun with his notepad, "HOA disputes are usually civil matters, but this crossed the line into criminal activity. You cannot destroy or significantly interfere with someone's property access, regardless of any perceived violations. The fact that she did this in the middle of the night while you were sleeping shows consciousness of guilt. She knew it was wrong." I asked about getting the barriers removed, and the sergeant gave me the contact information for a local equipment rental and moving company that could handle it. He confirmed that I had every legal right to remove them immediately, and that I should save all receipts for reimbursement in the civil case that would inevitably follow. After the police left, I called the equipment company, and they quoted me $800 to bring a crane truck and remove all 3 barriers. It was highway robbery, but I had no choice. They could not come until the next morning, which meant I was effectively trapped at my house for the rest of the day. I called my neighbor, Tom, who lived 2 houses down and had always been friendly, to see if I could get a ride to the grocery store if needed. Tom answered on the second ring, and his voice was tight with anger. "Frank, I saw what Patricia did to your driveway. I cannot believe she actually went through with it. She has lost her mind." "You knew she was planning this?" I asked, surprised. "She mentioned it at the last HOA board meeting, but I thought she was just venting. She was furious about your basketball hoop and the color of your front door. I voted against taking any action, but Patricia and her 2 cronies outvoted me and James. I thought maybe she would send you another warning letter, not commit actual vandalism." This was news to me. "My basketball hoop? It is a portable hoop that I put up on weekends when my son visits, and my front door is the same color it was when I bought the house." Tom sighed heavily. "According to Patricia, portable basketball hoops are prohibited because they are not permanent fixtures and lower property values, and your front door is supposed to be repainted every 3 years per the covenants, and apparently your paint is 4 years old. She has been documenting violations for months, building a case. But Frank, nobody expected her to do something like this. This is criminal." We talked for another 10 minutes, and Tom explained that Patricia had become increasingly aggressive over the past year. She had fined multiple residents for minor infractions, some of which were questionable at best. One family got a $500 fine for having decorative rocks that were the wrong shade of brown. Another resident was fined for parking their car on the street overnight when their garage was being repaired. The HOA had become less about maintaining property values and more about Patricia wielding power over everyone around her. After hanging up with Tom, I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything. I took dozens of photos from every angle, measured the barriers, and created a detailed timeline of events. My attorney Marcus finally called back around noon, and I could hear the shock in his voice as I explained the situation. Purr. Frank, this is beyond a typical HOA overreach case, Marcus said. This is criminal conduct. The video evidence is gold. We're going to file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against Patricia Henderson and the HOA board, a civil suit for damages, harassment, and intentional interference with property rights. And I am going to contact the Arizona Attorney General's office about HOA abuse. This is exactly the kind of case that makes headlines and changes laws. Marcus explained that Arizona had specific statutes protecting homeowners from aggressive HOA actions, but enforcement was often lax because most people did not want the hassle and expense of fighting back. The legal fees could be substantial, but Marcus believed this case was so egregious that we could argue for full attorney fee recovery, punitive damages, and potentially even get the entire HOA board removed. How much is this going to cost me? I asked, knowing legal battles were expensive. I will take this on contingency for the civil damages, plus hourly for the restraining order and injunctive relief, Marcus said. But Frank, document every single expense you incur because of this, the removal costs, any lost work, stress-related medical bills if you see a doctor, everything. We are going to make them pay for all of it. That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA management company, a firm called Arizona Community Solutions. The email was formal and threatening, stating that I had violated multiple community covenants and that enforcement action had been taken. The violations listed were absurd. My portable basketball hoop, my front door paint, parking my truck in my own driveway instead of the garage, having a decorative flag that exceeded size restrictions, and failing to maintain my desert landscaping to community standards. I read through the email 3 times, my anger building with each pass. Every single alleged violation was either false, exaggerated, or so minor that it should have warranted a simple conversation, not concrete barriers blocking my property. The basketball hoop was used once a week. My front door was in perfect condition. I parked my truck in the driveway because I used my garage as a home office. The flag was a small Arizona Cardinals pennant that was maybe 12 inches across, and my landscaping was immaculate, professionally maintained by a service I paid $200 a month to manage. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a detailed rebuttal of each claim, including photos showing my well-maintained property. Marcus responded within an hour, saying this was even better for our case because it showed retaliatory conduct without reasonable basis. The fact that they had taken such extreme action for such minor alleged issues demonstrated malicious intent and abuse of authority. That evening, I got a call from an unknown local number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Patricia Henderson, and her voice had that fake sweet tone that made my skin crawl. Frank, this is Patricia Henderson from the HOA board. I wanted to reach out personally about the enforcement action we took regarding your property violations. You mean the concrete barriers you illegally placed in my driveway at 3 a.m? I said coldly. There was a pause and her tone shifted slightly, losing some of the fake sweetness. The HOA has the authority to enforce community standards. You were given multiple warnings about your violations, and you chose to ignore them. We had no choice but to take direct action to ensure compliance. Patricia, I have you on video directing workers to place those barriers while I was asleep. I've already filed a police report, and officers are pressing criminal charges. You trespassed on my property, blocked my access, and committed criminal mischief. HOA authority does not extend to breaking the law. Her voice went up an octave, becoming shrill. How dare you? I am the president of this HOA, elected by the community to maintain our standards and property values. Everything I do is for the good of this neighborhood. You and your attitude are exactly what is wrong with Saguaro Hills. You think rules do not apply to you, that you can just do whatever you want. What rules are you talking about? I demanded. A basketball hoop I use once a week? A flag the size of a notebook? You have lost your mind, Patricia, and now you are going to face legal consequences for it. She hung up on me, but not before I heard her muttering something about entitled homeowners and disrespect. I immediately called Marcus and told him about the conversation, and he said it was perfect that she had called because it showed continued harassment and lack of remorse. He advised me not to answer any more calls from her or the HOA board and to refer everything to him. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Patricia standing in my driveway at 3 a.m, directing workers to block my access, and feeling so entitled to do it that she did not even try to hide her face from security cameras. The sheer audacity was mind-boggling. This was not someone who thought she might be bending the rules. This was someone who believed she was above them entirely. The equipment company arrived at 8 the next morning with a crane truck and 2 workers. They made quick work of the barriers, lifting each one onto their flatbed truck. The foreman, a burly guy named Mike, told me he had never seen anything like this in his 20 years in the business. Usually, we move these things for construction sites or city projects, Mike said, watching his crew secure the last barrier. I have never seen someone use them to block a residential driveway. What were they thinking? They were thinking they could get away with it, I replied. Mike gave me the invoice for $800, and I paid with my credit card, making sure to get a detailed receipt. As the truck pulled away with the barriers, I felt a small sense of relief. At least I could get in and out of my driveway again. But the larger battle was just beginning. Later that morning, Marcus called with an update. The court approved our emergency restraining order. Patricia Henderson and any HOA representatives are prohibited from coming within 50 feet of your property, from contacting you directly, and from taking any further enforcement actions pending a full hearing. We also got a temporary injunction against the HOA, assessing any fines or penalties against you. The hearing is set for 2 weeks from now. That was fast, I said, impressed. The video evidence made it an easy call for the judge. When you have someone on camera committing what is essentially vandalism while explaining their illegal intent, courts tend to act quickly. I also got confirmation that the Scottsdale police forwarded the case to the prosecutor's office. Patricia is going to be charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. If convicted, she is looking at potential jail time. The news spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire in the Arizona desert. By that afternoon, I had 3 neighbors stop by to tell me they supported what I was doing and that Patricia had gone too far. Tom came over with his wife Sarah, and they brought documentation of their own issues with the HOA. Patricia fined us $600 last year because our saguaro cactus was dying, Sarah explained, showing me the violation notice on her phone. She said it violated the landscaping standards to have dying plants visible from the street. But saguaros die naturally sometimes. We had to pay a fortune to have it removed and replaced, and the HOA kept the fine even after we complied. Another neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who lived across the street, told me about being fined for having her trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. The fine was $300, even though she had been sick and forgotten to bring them in after collection. When she tried to appeal, Patricia had denied it and added a late fee when Mrs. Chen took 2 weeks to pay. The stories kept coming. A young couple, newly moved in, had been fined for parking a moving truck in front of their house for 1 day while they unloaded. A retired veteran had been cited for flying an American flag that was supposedly too large, even though it met all local and federal guidelines for residential flag display. The HOA, under Patricia's leadership, had become a nightmare of petty tyranny and unreasonable enforcement. Why has nobody fought back before? I asked Tom as we sat on my patio that evening, drinking beer and watching the sunset paint the desert sky orange and purple. Fear mostly, Tom admitted. Legal fights are expensive and stressful. Most people just pay the fines and try to stay under the radar. Some have sold their houses and moved rather than deal with it. Patricia has gotten away with this behavior for so long that she thinks she is untouchable. You're the first person to really fight back hard enough to make a difference. Well, I'm not backing down, I said firmly. What she did crossed every line. If I let this go, she will keep doing it to other people. Someone has to stand up to bullies. Tom raised his beer bottle. I will testify at your hearing if you need witnesses to her pattern of behavior. So will Sarah. I think a lot of people in this neighborhood will once they know someone is finally taking her on. Over the next week, Marcus built our case methodically. He deposed Patricia, the HOA board members, and the workers who had placed the barriers. Patricia's deposition apparently did not go well for her. According to Marcus, she was defensive, refused to admit wrongdoing, and doubled down on her authority as HOA president. She claimed everything she did was within her rights and that I was the problem resident disrupting the community. The workers, however, told a different story. They testified that Patricia had specifically instructed them to place the barriers at night when I would be sleeping, that she had paid them in cash to avoid creating a paper trail, and that one of them had expressed concern about the legality but was told not to worry because she had authority. Their testimony, combined with the Ring camera footage, created an airtight case of intentional criminal conduct. Marcus also obtained records from the HOA management company showing the pattern of fines and violations Patricia had issued over the past 2 years. The data was shocking. Under her presidency, the HOA had issued 4 times more violation notices than in the previous 5 years combined. The fines collected had increased by 300%, and most tellingly, 92% of the violations had been issued to homeowners who had previously disagreed with Patricia at board meetings or challenged her decisions. This shows a clear pattern of retaliation and abuse of authority, Marcus explained during one of our strategy sessions at his office. Patricia has been using her position to punish people she does not like and to generate revenue for the HOA through excessive fines. This is exactly the kind of HOA abuse that state legislators have been trying to address, and your case could be the poster child for reform. The criminal case moved forward simultaneously. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, was enthusiastic about the case. She met with me and Marcus to review the evidence and explain the charges. Patricia was being charged with 1 count of criminal mischief, 1 count of criminal trespassing, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit criminal mischief, since she had hired the workers to help execute the plan. The video evidence is compelling, Jennifer explained. We have her on camera directing the placement of barriers on your property without permission in the middle of the night with the stated intent to prevent you from using your driveway. The law is very clear that this constitutes criminal mischief at minimum. The fact that she planned it, hired help, and paid them in cash to avoid detection shows consciousness of guilt and elevates this beyond a simple misdemeanor. What kind of sentence are we looking at if she is convicted? I asked. Criminal mischief at this level is typically a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona, which carries up to 6 months in jail and fines up to $2,500. The trespassing is another Class 1 misdemeanor. We are pushing for consecutive sentences given the egregious nature of the conduct. Most importantly, a conviction will create a criminal record that will impact her ability to serve on the HOA board and will support your civil case for damages. The restraining order hearing arrived on a Wednesday morning. The courtroom was surprisingly crowded, with at least 20 residents from Saguaro Hills showing up to support me or watch the proceedings. Patricia arrived with her own attorney, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit who carried a briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Judge Sandra Martinez presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a reputation for fairness and impatience with legal games. Marcus presented our case methodically. The Ring camera footage, the police reports, the pattern of HOA abuse, testimony from neighbors, and documentation of all my expenses. The footage played on a large screen in the courtroom, and I watched several people gasp as Patricia's voice came through clearly directing the placement of the barriers. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that this was an internal HOA matter, that Patricia had acted within her authority as president, and that the homeowner covenants gave the board broad enforcement powers. Judge Martinez listened with a skeptical expression, occasionally jotting notes. When Patricia took the stand, her attorney asked her to explain her actions. She maintained that everything she did was proper and necessary. Mr. Dawson repeatedly violated community covenants despite multiple warnings, Patricia testified, her voice taking on that self-righteous tone I had come to despise. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to all residents to maintain our standards and property values. His violations were documented and egregious. The enforcement action was appropriate and within my authority. Marcus cross-examined her with surgical precision. Ms. Henderson, did you have permission to enter Mr. Dawson's property? I do not need permission. I am the HOA president. Did you place physical barriers on his property without his knowledge or consent? I directed the placement of enforcement barriers to ensure compliance. Did you do this at 3 a.m. while Mr. Dawson was sleeping? Patricia hesitated, sensing the trap. The timing was practical for the crew's schedule. Or was it because you knew what you were doing was wrong and wanted to do it when Mr. Dawson could not stop you? Objection! Argumentative! Her attorney called out. Sustained, Judge Martinez said, but she was looking at Patricia with open skepticism. Marcus continued. Ms. Henderson, you testified that Mr. Dawson's violations were egregious. Can you explain how a portable basketball hoop used once a week is egregious? It violates the covenant against temporary sports equipment. What about his front door paint? You claimed it was a violation. It exceeds the 3-year repainting requirement. Do you inspect every front door in the community for paint age? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. I address violations as they are brought to my attention. So someone complained about Mr. Dawson's door paint specifically? I noticed it myself during routine inspections. Marcus pulled out a photo. This is Mr. Dawson's front door, taken last week. Can you point out what is wrong with it? Patricia stared at the photo, which showed a perfectly maintained door in a standard tan color. It appears acceptable in this photo, but the age of the paint is the issue. How did you determine the age of the paint, Ms. Henderson? She had no good answer. The cross-examination continued for another 30 minutes, with Marcus methodically dismantling every justification Patricia offered. By the end, it was clear she had no legitimate basis for her actions and had targeted me personally. Judge Martinez did not take long to rule. I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony, and I find that Ms. Henderson's actions constitute clear harassment, criminal trespass, and abuse of her authority as HOA president. The ring camera footage is unambiguous. She directed workers to place substantial barriers on Mr. Dawson's property in the middle of the night without permission, with the admitted intent to prevent him from using his driveway. This is not HOA enforcement. This is vandalism and harassment. The judge made the restraining order permanent, prohibited Patricia from taking any enforcement actions against me, and ordered the HOA to reimburse me for all costs related to removing the barriers. She also made a pointed comment that she hoped the criminal case would proceed to hold Patricia accountable for her actions. As we left the courthouse, several neighbors congratulated me. Tom shook my hand enthusiastically, and Mrs. Chen hugged me with tears in her eyes. You did what none of us had the courage to do, she said. Thank you. But the fight was not over. The HOA board, minus Patricia, held an emergency meeting the next week. Tom attended and reported back that Patricia had been removed as president pending the outcome of the criminal case. The board also voted to retain a new management company and review all violations issued in the past 2 years. It was progress, but Patricia still faced criminal charges. The criminal trial was set for 6 weeks later. Jennifer Walsh, the prosecutor, kept me informed of developments. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Jennifer refused to offer anything less than a guilty plea to all charges with probation and community service. Patricia, apparently still convinced she had done nothing wrong, refused and demanded a trial. The trial lasted 2 days. I testified about discovering the barriers, the impact on my life, and the harassment I had experienced. The workers testified about Patricia hiring them and paying cash. The ring camera footage was played multiple times. Several neighbors testified about Patricia's pattern of abuse and retaliation. Patricia's defense was essentially that she believed she had authority as HOA president and that her intent was to enforce community standards, not to harass me. Her attorney argued that this was a civil dispute that should not have been criminalized and that Patricia was simply an overzealous volunteer trying to maintain her community. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Patricia guilty on all counts: criminal mischief, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy to commit criminal mischief. Patricia's face went white as the verdicts were read, and her attorney immediately requested appeal bond, which the judge granted. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Thomas Brennan, who presided over the criminal case, was not sympathetic to Patricia's arguments that she was just a volunteer who made a mistake. He sentenced her to 90 days in jail, suspended pending completion of 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, restitution to me for all my expenses, and a permanent prohibition from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. Ms. Henderson, you abused a position of trust and authority to harass and retaliate against a homeowner who had done nothing to deserve such treatment, Judge Brennan said during sentencing. Your actions were calculated, deliberate, and showed a stunning lack of respect for the law and other people's property rights. You have betrayed the trust of your community and must face consequences for that. The civil case settled before trial. The HOA's insurance company, facing the criminal conviction and overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing, agreed to pay me $75,000 in damages plus all my attorney fees. The settlement also required the HOA to revise its covenants to limit enforcement powers, implement an appeal process for violations, and provide annual training for board members on property rights and legal limits of HOA authority. Marcus was thrilled with the outcome. This is a landmark case for Arizona homeowners, he told me at our final meeting. You not only held Patricia accountable but forced systemic changes that will protect other homeowners from similar abuse. The criminal conviction sets a precedent that HOA board members are not above the law. In the aftermath, Saguaro Hills went through significant changes. A new board was elected, with Tom serving as president. The excessive violation notices stopped. The new management company implemented reasonable enforcement policies focused on genuine community maintenance rather than petty rule enforcement. Several homeowners who had been excessively fined received refunds or credits. Patricia disappeared from the community. I heard through Tom that she moved out of state rather than complete her community service in Scottsdale, where everyone knew what she had done. Her house sold quickly, likely at a loss given the publicity surrounding the case. My son, Jake, who was 12 and lived primarily with his mother but visited me regularly, thought the whole thing was both crazy and cool. Dad, you're like a superhero for fighting the mean HOA lady, he said one weekend while we shot baskets on the portable hoop that had started the whole mess. Not a superhero, buddy. Just someone who stood up for what was right when someone else was being a bully. But you got her sent to jail and everything. She sent herself to jail by breaking the law, I corrected. I just made sure she faced consequences. That is important. When people in power abuse that power, someone has to hold them accountable or it keeps happening. Jake nodded thoughtfully, taking a shot that bounced off the rim. So if someone is being unfair, you should stand up to them even if it is hard. Exactly. It was not easy fighting this case. It was stressful and expensive and took months. But it was the right thing to do, not just for me, but for all the neighbors who Patricia had been bullying. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but you do it anyway. The local news picked up the story about a month after the trial concluded. A reporter from the Arizona Republic interviewed me, and the article ran with the headline, HOA President Convicted After Blocking Homeowner's Driveway with Concrete Barriers. The story went viral online, generating thousands of comments from people sharing their own HOA horror stories and debating the role of homeowners associations in American communities. I was invited to speak at a state legislative hearing about HOA reform. The committee was considering new legislation to strengthen homeowner protections and increase penalties for HOA abuse. I testified about my experience, and several other homeowners from across Arizona shared similar stories of retaliation, excessive fines, and abuse of authority by HOA boards. The legislation eventually passed, creating stronger due process requirements for HOA enforcement actions, limiting fine amounts, requiring mediation before legal action, and establishing a state ombudsman to investigate complaints of HOA abuse. It was not perfect, but it was progress, and I felt proud to have played a role in making it happen. Life in Saguaro Hills settled into normalcy. The neighborhood remained beautiful, with well-maintained homes and desert landscaping that showcased Arizona's natural beauty. But now it felt like a community rather than a dictatorship. People waved to each other, chatted over fences, and did not live in fear of arbitrary violation notices. Tom and I became good friends, often grilling together on weekends and watching Cardinals games. His wife Sarah joked that I was a celebrity in the neighborhood, the man who took down Patricia Henderson. I preferred to think of myself as just someone who had refused to be pushed around and had the resources and determination to fight back. The Ring camera that had captured everything remained mounted by my front door, still faithfully recording. I checked it occasionally, but there were no more middle-of-the-night visits from angry HOA presidents with concrete barriers. Just neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bikes, and the peaceful rhythms of suburban life. One evening, about 6 months after everything concluded, I was sitting on my back patio watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was Marcus, and I wondered what legal issue had prompted the call. "Frank, I wanted to let you know that I just got off the phone with a homeowner in Tucson who saw the news story about your case. She is dealing with a similar situation where her HOA is retaliating against her for complaining about financial mismanagement. She wants to know if you would be willing to talk to her about your experience and maybe provide a statement for her case." I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to be done with HOA drama and just live my life. But I remembered Mrs. Chen's tears, Tom's frustration, and all the neighbors who had been afraid to speak up against Patricia's bullying. If sharing my experience could help someone else, how could I refuse? "Give her my number," I said. "I am happy to help." Over the following year, I spoke with dozens of homeowners dealing with abusive HOAs. Some just needed advice and reassurance. Others became formal cases, with my testimony helping establish patterns of abuse or providing precedent for legal arguments. Marcus started specializing in HOA abuse cases, building a practice around defending homeowners' rights. The concrete barriers themselves ended up being returned to the rental company, which apparently billed Patricia's personal credit card for the rental period, since she had used them without proper authorization. It was a small additional consequence, but somehow satisfying, knowing she had to pay for the privilege of harassing me. I kept the basketball hoop, of course. Jake and I used it regularly, sometimes joined by neighborhood kids who would shoot hoops in my driveway on weekend afternoons. It became a symbol of sorts, a reminder that standing up to unreasonable authority was worth it, that communities should be about people helping each other rather than petty rules and power trips. The whole experience changed my perspective on homeowner associations and community governance. I understood the need for basic standards to maintain property values and community aesthetics. But I also learned how easily those organizations could be corrupted by individuals who craved power and control over others. The key was accountability, transparency, and residents willing to get involved in governance rather than leaving it to whoever wanted the position badly enough. At the next HOA annual meeting, which I actually attended for the first time, I was nominated to join the board. I declined, explaining that I was happy to participate but preferred not to serve in an official capacity. Instead, I volunteered to help draft new policies and review enforcement procedures. Tom and the new board welcomed the input, and together we created guidelines that balanced community standards with respect for individual homeowners' rights. One of the most satisfying moments came about 8 months after Patricia's conviction. I received a letter from the Arizona Attorney General's office informing me that their investigation into HOA practices had led to regulatory changes and several enforcement actions against management companies that had enabled board abuse. My case had been cited as a key example in their report, and the letter thanked me for bringing attention to these issues. I framed that letter and hung it in my home office next to a photo of Jake and me with the infamous basketball hoop. It reminded me that sometimes the fights we do not want to have are the most important ones. I had not asked to be blocked in my driveway by concrete barriers. I had not wanted to spend months dealing with lawyers and courts and police reports. But when forced to choose between accepting abuse and fighting back, I had fought back, and it had mattered. The financial settlement covered all my costs and then some. I used part of it to create a college fund for Jake and donated a portion to a nonprofit legal aid organization that helped homeowners who could not afford attorneys fight back against HOA abuse. The rest went into savings, a cushion for whatever life might throw at me next. My neighbors sometimes still brought up the incident, usually with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. "I still cannot believe she actually poured concrete barriers in your driveway," Mrs. Chen said at a neighborhood barbecue. Who does that? Someone who thought she was untouchable, I replied. Someone who had been getting away with smaller abuses for so long that she kept escalating. That is why it is important to push back against bullies early before they get to the point of pouring concrete barriers in your driveway at 3 a.m. Everyone laughed, but there was truth in it. Patricia had not started with concrete barriers. She had started with petty fines and unreasonable demands, testing boundaries and seeing what she could get away with. When nobody pushed back effectively, she escalated, becoming more aggressive and vindictive until she crossed the line into criminal conduct. The Ring camera footage, which Marcus had preserved carefully, ended up being used in training materials for HOA management companies as an example of what not to do. The video of Patricia directing workers to block my driveway became infamous in property management circles, a cautionary tale about board members who let power go to their heads. I sometimes wondered what Patricia thought about how everything turned out. Did she genuinely believe she had been in the right? Did she regret her actions? Did she learn anything from the criminal conviction and public humiliation? I would never know, and honestly, it did not matter. What mattered was that she faced consequences for her actions and could not hurt anyone else in an HOA context. Jake asked me once why I had fought so hard instead of just moving to a different neighborhood. It was a fair question. Fighting the case had been stressful and time-consuming. Moving would have been easier in some ways. Because moving would not have fixed the problem, I explained. Patricia would have kept bullying other people. The HOA would have kept issuing unfair fines and violations. And I would have known that I ran away instead of standing up for what was right. Sometimes the harder path is the one you have to take because it is the right thing to do, not the easy thing to do. He seemed to understand, and I hoped the lesson would serve him well as he grew up. The world had plenty of people willing to take the easy path, to look the other way when others were being mistreated, to avoid conflict even when conflict was necessary. What the world needed was more people willing to stand up, speak out, and fight back against injustice, even in seemingly small situations like HOA disputes. The portable basketball hoop stood in my driveway for years after, a beacon of defiance against petty tyranny. Every time I saw it, I smiled, remembering the night Patricia Henderson's abuse finally caught up with her, all captured in perfect clarity by a Ring camera she never knew was there. Sometimes justice required luck, preparation, and technology all converging at the right moment. That night, with the camera rolling and Patricia directing her criminal conspiracy in the open, justice had gotten exactly what it needed. Looking back now, I realized the whole experience had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, the importance of documentation, and the power of community. Without the Ring camera, it would have been my word against Patricia's, and the outcome might have been very different. Without supportive neighbors willing to testify, the pattern of abuse would have been harder to establish. Without an attorney willing to take the case seriously and a prosecutor who saw the criminal conduct for what it was, Patricia might have faced only minor civil penalties. But all those elements came together, and the result was not just justice for me, but systemic change that protected other homeowners and sent a message to HOA boards across Arizona that abuse of authority would not be tolerated. That was worth every stressful moment, every legal fee, every hour spent documenting evidence and preparing testimony. The house I had bought seeking a fresh start after divorce had certainly provided that, though not in the way I expected. I had found a community, made real friends, learned to fight for what was right, and helped create positive change. The concrete barriers that had blocked my driveway that morning were long gone, but the impact of that night lingered in positive ways, rippling out through changed laws, reformed HOA practices, and homeowners who now knew they had rights and could enforce them. And every time Jake visited, we took the basketball hoop out of the garage and shot hoops in the driveway that Patricia Henderson had tried so hard to block. The swish of the ball through the net was the sweetest sound in the world, a reminder that sometimes the good guys actually do win, that bullies can be held accountable, and that a simple Ring camera can change everything when it catches the right moment at the right time. Life in Saguaro Hills continued peacefully, the way HOA communities were supposed to work when governed by reasonable people focused on genuine community welfare rather than personal power. My front door remained painted its original color, my landscaping stayed professionally maintained, and my portable basketball hoop went up and down as needed without anyone filing violation notices or threatening fines. Sometimes I walked past the spot where those concrete barriers had stood and shook my head at the absurdity of it all. Patricia Henderson had thrown away her reputation, acquired a criminal record, and paid tens of thousands in legal fees and restitution because she could not tolerate a basketball hoop and some imaginary paint violation. The sheer pettiness of it was almost impressive in its stupidity. But her loss was everyone else's gain. The neighborhood thrived under new leadership. Property values actually increased once the oppressive enforcement regime ended, and people felt comfortable living in their own homes without fear. The HOA focused on genuine issues like maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and handling real problems rather than manufacturing violations to generate fine revenue. I remained vigilant, though. The Ring camera stayed active, recording 24/7. I stayed involved in HOA meetings and policy discussions, and I made sure every new neighbor who moved into Saguaro Hills heard the story of Patricia Henderson and the concrete barriers, both as entertainment and as a warning about what could happen if residents did not stay engaged in their community governance. The basketball hoop that started everything remained my favorite possession, not for its monetary value, but for what it represented: freedom, resistance, justice, and the simple right to live in your own home without unreasonable interference. Every time the ball swished through that net, I thought about that night when Patricia's arrogance caught up with her, all recorded in perfect detail by technology she never considered, and I smiled.